epidemiologists, they will try to define if it's coming from bacteria, from viral disease, from cancer, or something else. They don't say that the diagnosis is cough. Unfortunately, preeclampsia like to say cough in pregnancy, because preeclampsia is the hypertension proteinuria. It doesn't identify anything else. Which are the problems usually that brings to the difficulties, at least until now, to classify the obstetric disorder? They are multifactorial. There are many factors that intervene. The homeostasis of the mother versus the relationship with the fetus. And of course, different probably epigenetic factors vary in every part of the world. So, in the recent year, what is a disease that in the past was gestational diabetes, return labor, and so on, have been defined more as Greek obstetric syndrome or obstetric syndrome. The diagnosis so far has only described clinical manifestation without any consideration of specific etiology. But we know that the obstetric disorder which account for a high degree of maternal and perinatal morbidity and mortality are multifactorial and have been defined as Greek obstetric syndrome. This is one of the opening editorial which I wrote some years ago in the Black Journal addressing this issue. Why? The obstetrical syndrome has multiple etiology. This is what we know.
Cho mình dán cái này xuống nha. Không mỗi là không sao đấy mình đi bạn.
Now, if we have preeclampsia coming up as symptoms after 30 weeks, it doesn't mean that they started 2 days before, but they started already with the placenta formation, so many weeks before. Then there is always involvement of fetus neonatal, of the newborn, for instance, growth restriction. Then the disease is an interaction between gene, environment, and epigenetics, and the clinical manifestations are often adaptive in nature. And there is now accumulating observation, which what we call preterm labor, preterm rupture of brain, preeclampsia, more computational age, stillbirth, and so on, are conditions which can be defined more as syndrome. And many of them recognize as principal etiological factors the placental dysfunction. Okay? When start pregnancy, we need to change our immune system. The mother should go from a Th1 prevalent or balanced Th1, Th2 system to a more active Th2 in order to protect the fetus. Otherwise, if maintained with Th1, there is a very high inflammatory status, and therefore there is a rejection. The second, which I showed you before, is the angiogenesis, new vessel, and the invasion of thromboblast. And this should come to a certain point in the junctional zone, which is a zone which goes from the endometrium to the magnetrium. If the spiral arteries are not invaded enough, then they maintain the capability to react. And this reactivity brings atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis brings a lot of oxidative stress. And this oxidative stress at the end is causing a shortening of pregnancy, increase apoptosis, increase a lot of damage to the cells. Of course, if we have a very good maternal body, this enters interaction with the maternal homeostasis. The diet is good, the genotype is good, no disease, young age, no particular risk factor. The antioxidant defense are overcoming this period, and therefore the pregnancy can continue. But if we have a bad lifestyle, we are smokers, we have, unfortunately, we take a drug, we have a metabolic disorder and so on, then our capability to face this time of the placenta formation is much reduced, and this can bring to the shortening pregnancy. So nowadays, even though we have a better terminology, we still have to understand better the etiology, the diagnosis, because we are trying to make the diagnosis, but we are not certain. You see how many times there are revisions of the terminology of obstetrics. Methods to try to prevent or predict are developed. For instance, now we are all concentrated first trimester screening of biomarkers, but nobody is absolutely good. There is a lot of false positive. Results in any case of our attempt to prevent are very unpredictable. Sometimes are good, sometimes are not so good. But in any case, whatever it happens, the cost, the burden for the society, for the family, are very high. Now, let me look at the role of progesterone, because progesterone is by definition the hormone which has been discovered as a progestational agent. You know, progesterone is an acronym, means progestational steroid ketone. Okay? So basically it's a steroid molecule. So it's basically an anti-inflammatory hormone, because steroids are anti-inflammatory and modulate immune response. And what it does is summarized in this slide, but you can download free that issue which I edited of the best research and practice of aesthetic gynecology in the medical journal 2 years ago. It is even translated in Vietnamese, so it's very easy to understand. And you have all the picture of what progesterone does in obstetric gynecology, but basically also some information about the pharmacodynamics, which are so important to understand why this drug can be useful. Okay? There are two other issues I want to underline for those who were not present before. Progesterone is a drug which can be absorbed by any route, the micronized form. Previously of the micronization, only the intramuscular route was possible. Then micronization gives the possibility of absorption by mucosa. Now the mucosa, however, if it's gastrointestinal, brings to the liver. And the liver has a lot of enzymes which transform progesterone in metabolites, which are not only the ones that we know that are acting on the uterus, ovaries, and so on, but also the brain as a GABA system interaction. If I take only transdermal, progesterone has very low absorption, so can be useful only if we use the breast disease, breast pain, and so on. The intramuscular subcutaneous, nowadays we have also subcutaneous with the water vehicle, are very discomfortable because in any case they're painful, and they bring supraphysiological concentration, which nobody has yet understood if they are useful or not. And finally, the vaginal or rectal route, one of the two, because the mucosa is very similar and the receptor binding is very similar, which avoid the hepatic passage. Therefore, there is no effect on the brain. The third point is that progesterone is unique. It has capabilities which no other substance we call nowadays progestogen or progestins has similar. They bind to the same receptor, but they don't bind to many other receptors which progesterone bind in the body of a female. Okay, even the male. And we have to be careful when you use, particularly in pregnancy, because all the features that progesterone neutralize in pregnancy, no other progestin has so far. Finally, it's a matter also of concentration. When I give progesterone, I have to give it to a certain amount in order to reach meaningful concentration which have a pharmacodynamic effect. So if I want to get, for instance, luteal phase support, which means that I have a concentration of progesterone should at least be more than 10 nanograms per milliliter. I cannot use 200 milligrams or 100 or so. I would at least use 600. And sometimes, because of receptivity, I have to go up to 1 gram. It has been demonstrated very recently in a Japan study that in order to support the luteal phase against pregnancy, they give 1.2 grams of progesterone successfully. No side effect. And finally, progesterone has a feature that is part from the beginning to the end of a pregnancy. It's not like a normal like oxytocin, which is intervene later. Progesterone can stop contraction when the uterus usually expels anything is coming in. Even the embryo can be expelled by the uterus if there is not progesterone enough. This is a demonstration. You see contraction, which are coming when the embryo is inserted, for instance, assisted reproductive technology. And if you don't have enough concentration of progesterone, you have less implantation. Okay, so this is very important. Now, the concept of miscarriage and preterm birth. They are similar. They have similar risk factors. And they cannot say that I have a disease of preterm birth. It's not a disease. It's a time when the fetus is expelled. The same happens with the miscarriage. The only difference between the two is that I give the possibility to survive conceptually by consensus when the pregnancy has reached 22 weeks more or less, even though the window is very slippery, because in some countries 22, in some other 24, in some other 26, in some of the East Asia countries was even 28 before they changed their terminology at the central level. So they have statistics, and of course, taking into account all the preterm baby before 28, they look good. Now, what are the factors? There are factors that identify characteristics of a woman. The age, lifestyle, ethnicity, black woman for instance, reproductive system disease, endometriosis, or maternal medical disorder, thyroid or diabetes. Environmental factors, which means what I eat, where I'm staying, and what I do. For instance, smoking, eating in a bad way, junk food, McDonald's, these kind of things. And it's not good because there is a lot of toxic chemicals which are entering with these nutrients, which are going to the fetus without any stop from the placenta. And of course, the recurrence of this preterm birth or previous abortion, they have a very much high chance to be recurrent. In pregnancy, the mechanisms are the same. There is stress, there is a placental dysfunction, there are too many fetus in the womb, like twins or triplets. There is a nucleoplacental dysfunction, the same, or inflammation infection. And the mechanisms are the same. Mechanisms are myonuclear contraction, rupture in the cervix, premature rupture of brains, and then expulsion of the fetus or the abortion. The only factor which I cannot prevent, because all these factors, if we know, we may do some prevention. Okay? It's a matter of health system, trying to convince everybody not to smoke, not to drink alcohol in pregnancy, not to take caffeine in pregnancy, because also caffeine is inducing abortion and paternity. But the only one we cannot change is the sex of the fetus. Sex of the fetus, the boy are much more disadvantaged than the girl. The boys have 2/3 more chance to be aborted and to get out of preterm than the girl. And they will survive even less better, because the girls survive much better. There is a neonatology, very expert, they can confirm this. The girls always get better. So the strong sex in pregnancy is to be female. After when we are born, we boys think that we have a strong sex, but I don't think that it's true, because in any case, female even age longer than men, so they are better in any case. So the trial, which has demonstrated some effect, and I want to compare the two, are the trial produced by the group of Birmingham, by the multi-center way, 5,000 more women randomized, effect of progesterone in recurrent miscarriage or treated miscarriage with a previous history of miscarriage, and there is no way that progestin doesn't work. This is another randomized trial, but made with progestin, no effect on live birth, and there is safety concern. As I showed before, the progesterone is without any safety concern. If we are starting with the progestin, 17-hydroxyprogesterone caproate has been linked to diabetes and to offspring and tumors. And now it's been stopped in the United States to be used. And this is another compound which has been linked with increased cardiovascular malformation, 5 times compared to any other drug. So these are, the recommendations currently going on in the Royal College, NICE, American College, and so on. And of course, for the recurrent miscarriage, as I said, or miscarriage, the chance that you avoid the miscarriage but you get a preterm birth is very high, because the factor remains. So Even the European Society of Human Reproduction say that be careful. If you have a patient which had an abortion or two abortions, she has much more chance to have a preterm birth. So take care of that patient community. Now what to do? Or you measure the cervix as it has been offered, or we continue progesterone, because progesterone, as I mentioned before, has been demonstrated now in randomized control trials to be good for supplementation in prevention of preterm birth. The previous speaker just mentioned this, or with a short cervix. Now, what does it mean, short cervix? Short cervix means to have a cervix by consensus less than 2.5, because we don't have a cutoff which is clear for every woman, is the same. There is a big dispute. Do we have to measure the cervix routinely, universal screening, or not? Now, FIGO has already 10 years ago almost endorsed the universal screening. Why? Because it's the only method that we have, at least to identify 2% of population which are amenable for some prevention. Otherwise, how you can get this kind of population? Only risk factors. Very difficult. And it's good to make a screening. We have shown by this number needed to treat, that the number for screening is very good. You need to screen 200 patients to avoid 1 preterm birth. If you compare with the PAP test, or breast screening, the number are much higher. But we do PAP test. We do the breast screening at 40 years of age. But we need much more patients to avoid more cancer. Now, the evidence is in favor of giving vaginal progesterone. You don't only decrease 50% the risk of preterm birth, but you ameliorate outcome, because you have much less morbidity in the newborn, especially IVH, neonatal intensive care admission, and necrotizing enterocolitis. And it's a good treatment. Look at this. Now we have by far stacked the evidence of antenatal corticosteroids. We need 10 to 20 patients which are treated with antenatal corticosteroids to save one baby from RDS or mortality. And we need the same number to treat a short cervix progesterone to save one more preterm birth and to arrive to term. So these numbers needed to treat are very good. Just to give an example for adults, when I have an angina, okay, and I take aspirin when I am 50 years old or 60 to avoid a stroke, you know how many people should take aspirin, low dose aspirin, in order to avoid one stroke? More than 1,500. Okay, so this treatment is good, but you have to treat a lot of people. Now, women with a preterm labor, also the previous speaker said, if you have a treated preterm labor, so you have some contraction, and you treat the patient with topolizing, you stop topolizing, what do you give after when she go home? This Australian study just published show that if you give a 400 milligram progesterone to this patient, you can get a prolonged pregnancy up to the end and have no recurrence of admission to hospital. So it's very good. And finally, I mentioned again the indication about pain. Now, in many countries, the screening of p-test plus nuclear translucency is very popular, but we are almost abandoning because the new NIPT wave, the free fetal DNA wave. No, we are very much fashion to use blood testing. I think we have not to abandon these, especially biomarkers, because PAP is very important biomarker for growth of the placenta. It's a growth factor which control glucose amino acid in the trophoblast for producing the best placenta formation. And many of the syndrome are related to very low PAP at the beginning of pregnancy. Preeclampsia, IUGR, preterm birth, miscarriage are all being related to PAP. But since we are focusing on the detection of chromosomal abnormalities, nobody has paid attention to this marker, okay? And they introduced new marker, more or less very similar. The advantage of PAP is regulated by progesterone. And you can see here that increase with the progesterone, and then stop the bite, giving an anti-progesterone receptors agent. So, in vitro, there is plausibility that papain is regulated by progesterone. So, we did a study. We take 9,000 patients who had nuclear transducer CP test. We screen those with a very, very low papain, 0.4 mmol. And of these patients, of course, we take out those which prove to have chromosomal fetal abnormalities by CBS, okay? And in those patients, we randomize 1-1-2, those who get in progesterone only for a few weeks, those who get in progesterone until 36, and those we didn't get anything, okay? It was difficult to get the medical approval because, you know, there was a very difficult way to treat this patient. But look at the result. If I have no progesterone, at least 65 to 70% pregnancy have problems. Abortion, return birth, IUGR, and so on. I didn't mention preeclampsia, but also there is an increase in preeclampsia. If you give a small weeks, a few weeks progesterone, I avoid some abortion, sure, but I don't avoid preterm birth. And if I give a progesterone until 36, I decrease statistically also the preterm birth. So this means that progesterone is active on the placenta disorders, okay, prevent some placenta disorder. My epilogue is the following. When we are dealing with a placenta-related disorder, or the so-called obstetric syndrome, we are very similar risk factor, we have very similar pathways to provoke the expulsion of fetus, and we have some, let's say, factors which are amenable for prevention. Now, this editorial which we wrote in the last book which published for the Globe, you can download free from Globe, and just came out 1 week ago, shortening of pregnancy. We are saying the key insight is the shortening of pregnancy. So, miscarriage in this case, preterm birth, which are two syndromes, okay? And mechanism risk factors which are very similar. But they are expressed with diverse variability in incidence depending on gestational age. It is possible that the interaction between one or more risk factors triggers mechanism of expulsion of fetus, and it is the maternal meiosis adaptation or maladaptation to fetal allograft which determines the earliness of the baby. Since pregnancy is a continuum, we must start to reframe the problem for its length, having common physiopathological ways, common risk factor, and in consequence modifying our therapeutic strategy and management. This is supported by the fact that a substance like progesterone is shown to be effective to prevent both miscarriage and preterm birth. So this is in keeping with the fact that nowadays we can have some prevention at the bottom given by obstetric assistance. With invitation to the World Congress on Twins, which will be in Italy next September, is a very big happening involving not only those maternal fetal neonatologists interested in twin pregnancy, but also psychologists, genetics, and so on. They will gather in the city was seen in Italy. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with you today and to be presenting to you our results on the preterm birth biomarker project, a collaborative project between the Hospital, Oak Brook, University of Oxford, and Serum Prognostics. So to start, I think most of us are aware about the importance of preterm birth. The latest figures are that it is estimated 13.4 million babies were born preterm in 2020. And we think that prematurity is responsible for nearly 1 million deaths of children under 5 years of age globally. Interestingly, the rate of preterm birth varies a lot around the world, from 4% to 16%. But what is important that you can see from this graph from Erica Huma and colleagues is that between 2010 and 2020, there's been almost no change in the rate of preterm birth in any of the regions around the world. So clearly more needs to be done. So if we could predict preterm birth, there's a chance that we might be able to use the progesterone, as Professor Giancarlo was telling us about, and other interventions to prevent preterm births. However, this has proven very challenging, and many groups have tried to identify biomarkers, that is blood tests or ultrasound markers, to predict preterm birth. And back in 2010, a systematic review found that there was no biomarker that was particularly good at this. Prognostics is a USA-based company who identified through proteomic analysis that a change in two proteins, an increase in the insulin-like growth factor binding protein 4, IGF-BP4, and a decrease in sex hormone binding globulin could predict spontaneous preterm birth in some women. And you can see here in their study of 5,000 American women, the area under the curve was 0.75, which is moderate. This was the ROC curve graph, and if you're not familiar with looking at these graphs, if the line went directly across the diagonal, it would mean it had no effect, but the fact that it's moved towards the left-hand side means there is some predictive ability. So why these proteins? Why are these important? Well, we know that both of them are expressed by the placenta. IGF-BP4 regulates insulin-like growth factors involved in nutrient delivery to the fetus, and it's upregulated in small gestational age babies, hinting that there could be, in placentas where there is a problem with the pregnancy, it can be upregulated. Conversely, sex hormone binding globulin, which is also expressed by the placenta as well as the liver, we know is suppressed by pro-inflammatory cytokines, such as tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin beta, which we know inflammation is a very important pathway in leading to preterm birth. So Sera, the company in the USA, have commercialized this test there, and this is from their website. But importantly, before we rush out and use this test on our patients, either here in Vietnam or anywhere else in the world, we need to make sure that that test passes 5 important questions. Firstly, the test was discovered and that there is an algorithm to predict, and the Sera people have done that. The second question is, does the test predict the outcome in the population it was developed in, which I've just shown you in America, it does. But here's the important bit. Does the test actually predict the outcome in other populations, like here in Vietnam or anywhere else? And probably most crucially, if the test is positive, what would that mean for that patient? What would change, and does it change the outcome? And we don't know those last 3 questions. So this led to the preterm birth biomarkers project being established here in Vietnam. And as I mentioned, it is a collaboration between 2U Hospital, Sera Prognostics, Oak Group, who are based here in Ho Chi Minh City, and University of Oxford, where I am based. And our questions were to externally validate, so check that this test actually predicts preterm birth for all causes of preterm birth, and also spontaneous preterm birth in a Vietnamese population. We then wanted to see whether we could improve the performance of this test using clinical risk factors and identify in whom does the test work best. So we know preterm birth is a very complex syndrome, so it's unlikely one blood test will be good for everyone. But are there some women who this test will be particularly good for? The methods of the test, some of you in this room may have been involved in this study. So we conducted a prospective case cohort study of preterm and term deliveries. And I'll talk about what case cohort means in another slide. Our study population was pregnant women presenting to the ultrasound department of TU Hospital for their mid-trimester anomaly scan, and the recruitment ran from 2016 to 2018, and then we waited for everyone to deliver. Eligible, we were women over 18 years of age with a viable single pregnancy between 19 weeks and 22 weeks and 6 days, and planning to deliver at the hospital. At the baseline visit, we took detailed medical and obstetric histories based on a study called Intergrowth 21st, which is an international study looking at fetal growth and preterm birth. And these were taken by trained research midwives. You can see the room there where the screenings took place in the hospital. They also collected a 7 ml blood sample. And importantly, if any of you are doing studies on preterm birth, you need to be 100% certain of the gestational age of the participants. And so we used ultrasound-aged pregnancies less than 14 weeks from Crown Mountain. The serum sample processing was done at TU Hospital and then stored at -80 at Oakbrook. And at the end of the study, all of the samples for processing were shipped to the USA for analysis. Our outcome measures were all-cause preterm birth less than 37 weeks and spontaneous preterm birth less than 37 weeks. The difference being that spontaneous preterm birth is when there are signs of labor initiation, such as contractions, bleeding, rupture of membranes. Secondary outcomes, we looked at the same things but for less than 34 weeks of gestation. Okay, so I apologize, the writing is a little bit small, but this is from our recently published paper describing the flow of participants. So the research midwives at TU screened 10,711 women for this study, and of them 5,000 consented to participate and were eligible. The team at TU did an absolutely incredible job, and there were only 16 lost follow-up in this very large study, so we have an almost complete case for analysis. And within that, we had 335 women deliver preterm, around 6.5%. You can also see here that the medically indicated preterm birth, MIPTB, was relatively small at 66 out of the 335. So what is case cohort design and why did we use it? Well, a cohort study, many of you will be familiar with, and this is where you select a group of people and the pregnancy study will follow them through pregnancy, birth and beyond. And this is where we started doing this. But because it's very, sometimes in research it can be quite labor intensive and expensive to do the laboratory tests on 5,000 people, what we did was we randomly selected from the 5,000 a sub-cohort of 500 women for the analysis of the biomarkers. Obviously the cases, all women who had preterm births were also included, so all 335 women we would do the analysis for. But what I want to point out to you is that some women will fall into both groups, naturally because the random selection will include those who eventually deliver preterm at the background prevalence rate. So there's some design features to consider. Our baseline characteristics for these women were similar between age, BMI, and about half were melliferous in both those who delivered term and preterm. But note in the preterm births, thinking of women who are in their second or subsequent pregnancy, a much higher number had had a previous preterm birth. So how did the test perform? Well, this is the sort of results, I guess, here. So when we just ran the biomarker, the IGFBP or SHBG biomarker, and we just, without any tuning or adjustment, it did look like there was a distinct signal between the two groups. So the blue group on this slide, or green blue, are the people who delivered at term, and the pink group are those who delivered preterm. So you can see there is a difference in the peaks, and in the violin plot you can see the cases, the preterm, it was slightly higher, but a lot of overlap, you have to agree. at the performance of the test, it was significant, but not quite as good as what they'd seen in the United States. So the AUC, area under the curve, was about 0.6 for spontaneous preterm birth and all preterm birth, and around 0.67, 0.68 for less than 34 weeks. So performed better earlier, but still maybe not good enough for us to consider taking forward into clinical practice. So the next step was to see whether we could tune this test for the Vietnamese population using the clinical risk factors we knew of. And we found very soon that the nulliparous women had very different risk factor profile to the multiparous women. And this is a diagram from the lasso regression, which is looking to see what are the most associated features. And we can see for nulliparous women that the most associated feature was actually our test, so that's reassuring. But the second most associated feature was miscarriage. And in the multiparous women, it was slightly different in that the most associated feature was actually the birth weight of the previous newborn in the negative, so the smaller the birth weight, the more likely you would have another preterm birth. And of course, this tied in with if they had a previous preterm birth. We know that birth weight and preterm birth are very correlated, obviously, and it's useful to see here that the third most predictive thing is actually biomarkers as well. So this led us to develop something we call OB risk, which for nulliparous was whether they had miscarriages, and for multiparous women, whether they had previous preterm births. So it was included in the algorithm. So what happened when we included this? Well, our performance of the model improved a bit. So the AUC was 0.65 for the less than 37 weeks all preterm and spontaneous preterm, and around 0.7 for less than 34 weeks. And these were all highly statistically significant, as you can see. When we think about how would this test be used in practice, would it differentiate groups of women who are likely to deliver preterm from those who are not? This graph shows that it can do that to an extent. So the orange line here is those who had the highest 20% risk score on their on the IPV for SHBG test. And you can see at all gestations they delivered earlier than the green line, which was the people who were low risk. So coming back to our 5 criteria, where are we now? I think we can say that the test does predict the outcome in the Vietnamese population. However, it's not going to predict all preterm births, and I think we can understand, given the complexity of preterm birth, why that might be. So what we don't know, however, is so what? So what are we going to do if we use this test? What will change? And would, most importantly, it actually change outcomes that are important for the parents and the baby? We don't know that yet. So in conclusion, I'd like to leave you with the point that very few proteomic biomarkers are ever properly externally validated, and few, consequently, are in routine use in obstetrics. The only exceptions would be the S-FLIT-PLGF ratio for preeclampsia, which has been extensively validated in other populations. And as Professor De Lorenzo mentioned, when you're looking at TAPE and the markers for aneuploidy have also been externally validated, but there's very few others, and not any for preterm birth. And despite the obvious population differences between women in the USA and women in Vietnam, this ratio did seem to be upregulated in some women who delivered preterm, hinting at potentially a mechanistic pathway to preterm, which is common around the world, but it needs more work. Inclusion of a very simple clinical variable was able to improve test performance. So what are the next steps here? Where to now? Well, as I keep coming back to, we need now to think about, so what? What would change if we had a test to predict preterm birth? And I come back to my point I made earlier, that it may be that this test works better in some women, and it may be that the treatments are more effective in those women. And so we need to be thinking about the whole pathway. Ideally, we would test this through a randomized controlled trial where everyone would have the sample taken and half of the group and their clinicians would be blinded to the result and half would not, and then we see whether there was any difference in neonatal outcomes at the end of the day. Importantly though, we cannot ignore the cost of these new tests coming in, and we need to make sure we do a thorough health economic evaluation, not just on the cost of doing a test, but the cost of any other actions which may result from that test or inactions that result from not doing the test. And this leads to then thinking about implementation considerations, which is a whole new direction to go to. And this includes the reliability of the test. As you remember, it was done all in the United States, the central laboratory. How would it perform if it was done in all the hospitals around the country or region? So my reflections on this project, which has been a huge privilege to be involved in, I think I put up this picture because it sort of shows to me the complicated journey which we're sort of still on and we're going on between the discovery of a proteomic biomarker and its use in clinical practice to improve patient outcomes is very long and complicated. Preterm birth is very heterogeneous syndrome, as we heard in the last talk, and it may be that this biomarker is useful for some preterm births, but it's not going to be useful for every preterm birth. And I want to highlight to you all the need for this sort of rigorous external validation before you adopt any test in your clinical practice. And finally, just as a note of thanks to all those who are involved in the study, that international collaborations can be extremely fruitful learning experiences and help us generate very high quality research. So thank you. And here's a picture taken a couple of years ago now with the team. So thank you very, very much. Thank you. So you're not rid of me yet. I have a second talk on a very, very different topic. The topic that is very important, I think, to everybody living on the planet, and that is around climate change and human health. So, the central slide, let's move on. Another slide. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about today is around the effects of climate change, particularly on women, but remembering that the effects of climate change on health are not gender neutral. So we know that there are direct effects and indirect effects, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the specific effects around pregnancy. But what other direct effects do we think of for climate change on health? We know that climate change can affect mental health, and for example, in heat waves, we know that men are more likely to die by suicide, whilst women are more likely to suffer anxiety-related conditions. We also know that in extreme heat events, older women are more likely to die. And then secondly, there are a lot of indirect effects of climate change on health, including effects on livelihoods of women, increases in gender-based violence, nutritional deficiencies, food insecurity, and changes in infectious disease patterns, which can affect mosquito-borne and other illnesses. In Europe, recently there was a landmark ruling of older Swiss women who sued the Swiss government at the European High Court, saying that they were disproportionately being affected by climate change because of their gender and their age, and they won. Other on here that disproportionately affect women in both their ability to get to somewhere safe in an emergency if they're not positioned to make that independent, and also their ability to access essential health care such as reproductive and mental health. And more recently, the work that I'm doing with colleagues in India was featured on the BBC about the extreme risks of heat on stillbirth in workers who are working out in the fields and have little protection from heat. We know, however, that underpinning all this is a huge lack of data around the effects of climate change broken up by men and women, but also looking at conditions like what we work on in reproductive health, looking at women alone. And this was at COP28, a call to action. So what are we talking about here? As I mentioned, we can consider environmental change, which is actually more than just climate change, including loss of biodiversity, air pollution, water salinity, and other forms of pollution, how it affects health conditions that affect all by gender, or how it affects female-specific conditions. And that's what I'm going to focus on now. So what I'd like to talk to you about for the rest of the presentation is some important work we're doing in India, which I think will have relevance here in Vietnam, about the effects of heat waves and extreme heat on pregnancy. So as a background, we know that there is quite consistent epidemiological evidence supporting an association between being exposed to extreme heat and preterm birth, stillbirth, growth restriction, miscarriage, anomalies, preeclampsia, and preterm rupture of membranes. However, the data is very heterogeneous and very inconsistent. And most importantly, there's very little data on capital populations most affected by heat and the rising temperatures. So how does heat affect pregnancy? Well, we published a review with VFAP last year showing that there are a number of different changes, physiological changes of pregnancy, which are designed to protect pregnant women from the increased risk of heat gain they face in pregnancy. These include the increased heat production from the fetus, an increase in basal metabolic rate, and reduced surface area volume ratio, making it harder for pregnant women to cool down. So the responses to that are the pregnant woman's temperature is a little lower, there's a lower threshold for sweating, an increased ability to absorb heat, and an increased plasma blood flow. Thinking back to, I mentioned the study in India, and I've circled one of the lady on the slide is a researcher who's been leading this work. The research group in Chennai that I'm working with has recently completed a prospective cohort of 800 pregnant women recruited in first trimester of pregnancy based on their occupational exposure to heat. So heat, being quite exposed, was defined as women who were either working outside in the fields or in other hot environments like on construction sites, and they were exposed to what's called a wet bulb blow temperature, which accounts for humidity and airspeed of greater than 27.5 degrees, heavy work and 28 degrees below. Now these thresholds are international thresholds that were developed for men living in America, who were the average 70 kilogram man, so it may not actually even be the right thresholds for pregnancy, but it's what we had available. And we captured some common outcomes you can see there. So I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, it is in the paper, but it's just to show that the study followed women through the pregnancy and took temperature measurements, physiological measurements, and questionnaires about their essential heat. And what did they find? Well, the graph at the bottom shows that there were two big groups, two peaks in the recruitment. So a group who had less exposure to heat and a group who had more exposure to heat, and it was roughly 50-50. And the groups were roughly similar in terms of age and BMI at start, but unsurprisingly, the women who were high exposed had lower socioeconomic status idea was that after controlling for those variables and some others, in the multivariate model, the adjusted odds ratio for composite outcome, miscarriage, low birth weight, preterm, stillbirth, IUGR was approximately double. And you can see that I've highlighted on the screen here in yellow. So, the big question though is why? Why are these women more likely to have these bad outcomes? Is it some other confounding variable we're not measuring around their socioeconomic status, like nutrition, something like that? Or is there something physiologic going on? And this leads me to the Eat in Pregnancy India project, which is a big 5-year Wellcome Trust project we're currently starting. It's a big collaboration with 6 institutes in India and 3 in the UK. And our aim is to identify if there are physiological or pathological pathways by which the exposure to extreme climactic heat leads to adverse pregnancy outcomes. So how are we approaching this? Well, as I mentioned, it's a big project, and we have 3 main approaches. One, we're looking at retrospective data. 2, we're looking at prospective study. And 3, we're doing qualitative work and policy analysis. And I'll quickly go through that in the final 11 minutes. So, for the retrospective data, we are working with colleagues from the Translational Health Sciences and Technology Institute in Delhi, who run a very big birth cohort called Garbini, which is very well characterized with ultrasound, clinical data, and blood samples throughout pregnancy and up to age 2 of birth for the infants. They have more than 10,000 baby mother pairs in this cohort, and importantly, all the mothers are located to their place of residence, so we can map what the climate exposure throughout their pregnancy is where they live. And as mentioned on the slide here, we're not just looking at heat exposure, but another important thing in India, as it is here in Vietnam, is air pollution. And the picture I took from my hotel when I was last there shows that air pollution is very high in Delhi, and it's also associated with some of these adverse outcomes, so we need to control for this. And we do a case control analysis across the placental biomarkers, preterm, small gestational age, and across seasons. And this slide just shows us the sample numbers that we're planning to analyse in this study. And in the interest of time, I won't go through it, but we've chosen whether they conceived in summer or winter and whether they delivered in summer or winter to try and create different cases of control. The second thing we're doing, I think, is quite exciting and quite novel. And this is we're working with a startup called Care Mother, who are based in Mumbai. They've developed a low-cost CTG machine, which has been used all across India. So this picture of India shows all the locations where this CTG machine is being used. And importantly, every CTG is digitalized and time and geolocation stamped. So in an anonymized way, what we're going to be doing is see whether there are any big trends in fetal heart rate during heat wave events, during cold events, and in other changes in climates. It's never been done before, but it's important because one of the ways we think heat is probably affecting pregnancies is blood flow changes in the womb, which are leading to blood flow changes in the baby, and we may be able to see that in this study. The next thing we're going to be doing is a prospective study, so that means we're going to be recruiting women and following them through their pregnancy, doing very detailed heat exposure and physiological and central measurements throughout pregnancy. And the study's been done in 3 sites, in the north in a place called Haryana, in the central area in the state called Chhattisgarh, and in the coast in the state called Pondicherry.
Nó muốn mẹ giải nhớt quá rồi.
And so, importantly, as I mentioned, we need to be able to capture how much heat are they exposed to. So we use a number of devices both to capture the heat in the workplace or the home, but also get them with wearable devices to capture their skin temperature and their microbiome exposure. You can imagine if someone's working over a hot stove, it's contact for her that might be in the room surrounding. So we'll do this frequency. At the same time, or around about the same time, we'll also measure the mother's hemodynamics. So looking at pulse, blood pressure, cardiac output, total peripheral vascular resistance each time using a non-invasive machine, which you can see here.
Nó đi rồi.
We will also do ultrasound at every trimester with standard biology and Doppler measurements, and in the third trimester also CT. And then we'll take a trimester blood sample to measure circulating biomarkers of placental function that we may have identified from work at the time, but also look at these things called circulating extracellular along the name. But what these things are almost like minuscule biopsies circulating around the mother's bloodstream. And transcriptomics, we can look at RNA, we can look at proteomics with these to see whether there's any deviation and it's all been done. And finally, once the baby's born, the story is not over. One thing we're very interested in looking at is the effects of heat on lactation and the mother's milk production. It may come as a surprise to you as much as me that we know far more about dairy cows and the effects of climate change on the dairy industry than we do on our own women. And so this study is going to look to see if there's changes in the transition of colostrum milk to ensure the composition of the milk and also serum prolactin levels using some handheld devices. And then, as I mentioned, the final element to this big project is actually listening to women and their experiences of being pregnant through heat waves and heat events, and also talking with policymakers and seeing where we can advocate to make sure that pregnant women and their babies are protected in heat action. So this will involve detailed discussions with focus groups, on-site observations, and sharing across the research. So if you want to know any more about this project, we have a web page now with a fact sheet from the George Institute. And then I guess the final thing to say is, where are we going in the future with this work and how would you be involved? Well, I'm very happy to talk to anyone about this. But what we hope to do is expand our focus beyond India to involve sort of global partnership. And we've currently got a grant under consideration with the UK funded or MRC. And we're really trying to improve data quality globally in this area. And you can see the partners we have already, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Australia, Mexico, and UK. It would be wonderful to have Vietnam there as well. So we're looking for others to work in this area. And so I'd like to thank my team, as you see, it's a big team on the Egypt Pregnancy Project, and very happy to answer any questions about our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sau này em cao bằng 2 triệu thôi. Đúng. Không có tay ngang luôn. Nhưng mà cái này cũng cao mà. Đảo này cũng 3 phân luôn. Này cũng 3 phân luôn. Này cũng 3 phân. Này cao bằng nhau. Mập cả. Bữa giờ nó còn nãy giờ các bạn thôi bây giờ đặt hết tới xong rồi xuống thì mình chia thôi. Xuống chỗ mà mình ngồi
nó đóng lại rồi đó.
em nhớ rồi ngồi đó nãy giờ vô chiều lại rồi cà phê đó ngon. Quán này có cái một rồi anh chỉ cái giá là đi hết là phải vô ngồi mà
quý bà. Và phiên 5B chúng ta sẽ bắt đầu lúc 15:10. Xin quý đại biểu vui lòng tự bảo vệ tư trang và tài sản cá nhân. Quý đại biểu vui lòng nhận giấy chứng nhận tham dự hội nghị tại quầy tiếp đón ở tầng trệt từ 14 giờ ngày 9 tháng 5 2024. Xin nhắc lại là giấy chứng nhận tham dự hội nghị chúng ta sẽ được nhận tại quầy tiếp đón ở tầng trệt từ 14 giờ ngày hôm nay. Xin cảm ơn.
Là nghỉ luôn á.
Có một đứa ở đây. Đi luôn.
Ủa là sao?
Đi luôn. Đi hai không?
Mở con phía sau lại còn có thể là ta hạ luôn. Hai đang cùng lên đi. Khi nào ấy?
Đi.
Được, lấy mình được. Mà ấy là ăn rồi đó, rồi cái lấy vô lấy cái thôi. Đâu, ngay dưới đây mà. Lúc nào cả hết. Chưa hết bây giờ chưa phát ở dưới. Ngoài hai đầu đây.
Đơn vị đại biểu này bị đồng
Mới mà.